Alright, we're going to go ahead and get started on making some paper clay. We're going to talk about and show you two methods of making paper clay, and then talk about a couple other ways that you can do it as well. First method is going to be using toilet paper. I've already started here trying to tear out the core. Sometimes that can be a little bit easier or harder depending on what type of toilet paper you have. Go ahead and discard the core, we're not going to need it. I know a lot of people talk about taking this and having to tear it up in pieces and whatnot. I'm not about to do any of that. That's just a pain in the butt and takes too much time. I am, however, just going to go ahead and get started on it and tear it as much as I can into some chunks and throw it in a bucket. Cheaper the toilet paper seems to work better than good toilet paper, just because I guess it's not made as well, doesn't bond, or the fibers aren't as good or cross, but whatever you have, I'm sure will work. I've seen so many different variations in talking about paper clay. There's really no perfect way. It's whatever you feel is best for your application and what you're working with. As far as this pumpkin goes, I'm not overly concerned about having the clay very, very smooth. I'm not sculpting fine detail. I'm primarily just using this to build out ridges and give it some nice definition for the face. So once we've got that ripped up, go ahead and pour some water in here. Just enough to make sure everything's covered so that we can give this a good soaking. This water is going to help break down these fibers so that we can further break it down as we go. So we're going to let that set. Nothing we can do about that except for let it set. Next method is going to be using the blown in insulation. Here's a block of it. I bought this last year and made paper clay from it. This is nothing more than the blown in insulation that's all made up of the paper fiber. So you can see it here. This whole block was, I believe, $8 last year, so it's not very much, and you're going to get a ton of use out of it. I liked it just because the fibers are already fairly small, they're already broken up, it's easy to work with, it's easy to use, and it was cheap. So $8 for all this. I've probably got a lifetime supply. I can't imagine using all this up. You never know, maybe I'll get bored and just start making stuff like crazy, but I doubt it. I'm going to move this off to the side. We're just going to fill this bucket up. Again, I'm going to pour water in it. Get this pushed down, and I want this to soak in this water. And it's just going to help break these fibers down even more. It's going to make it easier for us as we go to make the clay. I'm going to go ahead and mix that in, make sure everything's pretty well covered. See if I need more water in here. Sure, why not? And this is going to make a lot of paper clay. By no means am I going to end up using all of this. We'll make it up just for information purposes. The other couple things that you're going to need for your clay, you're going to need some joint compound. We're not going to use a lot of it. The joint compound is going to be added to it just to help give it something to smooth with. The fiber is going to do most of the work, but it seems to help with the texture when you add the joint compound. The other thing we're going to need is more glue. This is going to help bond everything together. We'll be adding glue later as we make it up. You can see this is just getting soaked. It's real easy to tear apart now as those fibers break down. Same thing goes for this. It's just sitting here getting soaked. Now, one thing that I found that makes it very easy to break this up, instead of sitting here tearing it into little pieces, I'm going to be one of these little wand mixers. Not sure exactly what it's called. This is a Braun brand hand blender. You can find these typically at Goodwill, thrift stores, yard sales. It seems to be one of those items that a lot of people have and tend to not use. So I think I got this for $3 at Goodwill, and this is the perfect tool. You could try to do this in a blender, a kitchen blender. It's a little bit more difficult. You don't have as much control, so this seems to work out great for me. I'm just going to push it in here, and we're going to get this thing as broken up as possible. Obviously, I'm making a mess. Trust me though, it is a lot easier than trying to break all of this down by hand. You can already see, just in that short little bit, this is down to just slop. This has just become paper pulp, which is exactly what we're looking for. This is doing pretty good. I don't see any big chunks left. Well, there's a few. There's a big chunk right there. Spoke too soon. I'm just going to run this around just a little bit more. Alright, and there essentially is our paper pulp. We're going to do the same thing to our insulation. Got a lot more water in this, and this is scary because I think this is going to be a mess. But oh well. Whoa. So again, this has done nothing more than break it up even further than what it already was, and has just created a nice paper pulp to work with. And that's all paper clay is. It's nothing more than paper pulp and whatever bonding agents you're going to use, and from there you're able to sculpt with this and create anything you want. We're obviously using it as an adder to our pumpkin, but once you've created this, you can use this as its own medium and sculpt with it in its entirety. I've seen a lot of stuff, especially on the internet, people that create some pretty fantastic things. Nothing that I don't think I could ever do, but from nothing but paper pulp. I think that's good enough. No point destroying it any more than what it already is. Just double check this one more time now that it's soaked a little bit. Because once you've done that and you've let it set, these fibers, of course, start to soak up all the water again and break down a little bit further. As you can see, this little hand mixer, whatever you want to call it, does a fantastic job. A lot easier than trying to do everything by hand. And trust me, it's much easier than the kitchen blender as well. So we're done with that. We're going to let that set off to the side. Told you I was going to mention a couple other ways. Two other options that you have, especially when it comes to making your own pulp, is if you don't have access to toilet paper, I feel sorry for you. But just in case you can't get a hold of toilet paper for one reason or another, or this blown-in insulation, you can also use an organic kitty litter. It's nothing more than paper pulp that's been pressed into these little pellets, and that's all it is. You've got to make sure it's 100% organic. You can probably read the bag. It's very inexpensive. That's why I bring it up, because depending on what type you're wanting to do, if you don't want to spend $8 for that, you don't want a lifetime supply, and you just want to buy a small bag of litter, you can do that. Works great. It takes a little bit longer. You're going to have to soak it for quite a bit, because those pellets, because they're compressed so tight, it takes a while for it to absorb the water. But do the exact same thing. Put it in the bucket, fill it up with water, just let it set for a while. Once you see that it's starting to swell up, go ahead and hit it with the blender, and you're good to go. Same method as what we've already done once you get it to the paper pulp portion. Another method, which is a lot more expensive, but if you don't feel like getting involved in the making of this and all the mess, is hit your local hobby store. We've got Hobby Lobby here in this area. They sell a box of paper clay. It's pre-formulated. The only thing you do is add water, mix it, and you're good to go. Stuff's great, don't get me wrong. It's extremely smooth. The fiber is almost like dust. So it's very, very good to sculpt with. But it's also very expensive, especially considering what you can do on your own. So I tend to stay away from it and just make my own clay. But at this point, what we need to do is we need to get rid of all the excess water. I'm not going to go through that. I'm going to go outside and do it. I'm just going to take a towel. I'm going to dump this into the towel and just squeeze it as much as I can to get all the excess water out. After that's done, then we'll be ready to mix in the glue and our drywall compound and be ready to go. Catch you in a minute. Okay, just got back, poured out the contents of both buckets into just a normal towel, and then just wrang it out as much as I could to get the water out. And that's left me with just some paper pulp that we can work with. And I just mixed both of these together. Like I said, the texture you get from from toilet paper is going to be a lot smoother than what you're going to get out of the blown-in insulation, but I'm not worried about having anything that's going to be extremely smooth or detailed, so I just went ahead and threw all this together. Let's go ahead and try to break it up a little bit more. And from here we're going to go ahead and add our glue and our drywall compound. so we can make up our clay. Really don't have a specific measurement to tell you to work with for any of these components. It's just whatever looks and feels good at that point, and that's going to be it. There's not really any. You obviously don't want to get it too wet because it's going to make it really. You don't want it runny. You just want it in a consistency that you can mold and work with. You know, if you can squeeze this thing into a ball and it stays and you can work with it, you know, kind of like a Play-Doh consistency, then I think you've hit the nail on the head at that point. You just play with it. One of the things that we're going to end up doing is letting this set anyway, because I have to wait for this pumpkin to dry since we just paper mache'd the stem. That's going to help only because as this sets, this pulp is going to soak in as much moisture as it can, and it may have to come back and start adding a little bit more either glue or drywall compound. That's going to just help me a little bit determine the consistency that I need. I'm just trying to mix this up as much as possible. If there's anything with this project that's going to bring the kid out in you, it's going to be this. Because you can get your hands all messy and this becomes a lot like Play-Doh. But you can see it's moldable. You can do stuff with this at this point. But as it sets, it's probably going to dry out a little bit more just because it's going to soak in. So it's going to be kind of nice that it's going to set here, and that way I can add more as I need to before I get started. For now, I just need to get down to the bottom and get this mixed up as much as I can. I suppose if this was wet enough, I haven't tried it, but I'll probably take that hand blender back to it just to help break up any of the chunks as it bonds together, make it smoother. Like I said, I haven't tried it, haven't really had to, but I suppose if I wanted a lot more detail, that might not be a bad option. And of course, there's still water. You know, we squeeze as much as we can, but there's still moisture in it, which is good. If there was no moisture at all, it's not something I would recommend doing and then letting it set and then trying to add your components to it, because you're going to use a lot more glue up and a lot more joint compound if this were to dry out. And if you know you're going to have a lot of work to do, you can make a batch of this up. It stays good for a while. I wouldn't recommend leaving it for a great length of time just because it can kind of sour up and start smelling funky if it starts to mold up. But otherwise, as long as you've got this closed in an airtight container, this stuff won't dry out and stay good for quite a while. You see, there's our beginnings of our paper clay. Becomes pretty workable. Makes me wish my pumpkin was dry so I could go ahead and get started. And this just brings a lot of life to your characters. But I'm going to throw this in here. I'm going to close it up, let it set. Again, I may have to add a little bit more to it, just as that paper has more of time to absorb some of that moisture out of the glue and drywall compound. Probably should have worn gloves. Would have been a good idea, but it's just drywall compound and glue, and it's not dry, so I can easily get rinsed off. So we're going to come back once this has had an opportunity to dry, and we'll start working with our paper clay on it and building it up. And after that, we will be ready to start sealing it and painting it. So we'll see you then.